this is a wonderful meeting today. We are doing it for the audience here in at our Shearman, Sterling, Washington, D.C. offices, but also for all of our friends around the world, at our clients, as well as friends at all other institutions, everybody who is supporting Ukraine today. I am George Casey, Global Managing Partner of Shearman Sterling, and I'm thrilled to have with me here Oleksiy Goncharenko, member of Ukraine's parliament of Rada. Oleksiy will tell a little bit about himself. And we will talk about the current war. We will talk about the situation in Ukraine. We will talk about how we all can help Ukraine. Oleksiy is doing a tremendous job. He's been, this is, I think, second visit during the war, right? In the US. He's been throughout Europe, really making sure that people understand what's happening, and we all, can see how we can help. So, Oleksiy, maybe starting with a little bit of your background. Very glad that you can be with us. Welcome to.
Thank you very much for great possibility to be with you and to speak with you.
Thank you. So maybe a little bit of your background. You've been in Rada. You're elected from Odessa. You are actually coming from medical background, right?
Yeah.
But you speak several languages, and you are now one of the major political forces in Ukraine. So a little bit of about yourself.
Thank you very much, and for great possibility to meet with you, and to those who will watch us on the web. My name is Oleksiy Goncharenko. I'm a member of the Parliament of Ukraine from 2014, represent Odessa region. Before this, I was president of Odessa Regional Council. It's like state senate or state house in American way. I was born in Odessa. Yeah, I really studied in Odessa Medical University, worked at ambulance in the hospital, but then I switched to politics and now active here. Also, I represent Ukraine in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, which is very important body which unites Council of Europe unites 46 countries after Russia is excluded from there after their invasion to Ukraine. 46 countries of the whole continent, and I'm there. I have an honor to be vice president of a committee on migration and refugees, which is also a very important topic for us. And that is my background. But today, like all Ukrainians, we try to do our best in order to win the war. The first month after invasion, I was in territorial defense. Because Russians were close to Kiev and there was no much space for any political work, but still we were trying. But after Russians were kicked off from Kiev, I decided that I'm better with my selfie stick than with the Kalashnikov, so that I came back to my parliamentarian duties. And yes, I think informational war is extremely important. So I have near 1.5 million followers in social media, YouTube, Facebook, Telegram, Twitter, and trying to do this work and also working on the international level in order to support, to lobby Ukrainian interest and in general free world, because I believe that this war, this invasion is a crucial moment of the first part of 21st century. It will define next decades. And I believe that free world should expand and become stronger. And either you expand or you shrink. There is no other way. And this war showed it again. And that's why I believe in the future of free world and see Ukraine to become like a frontline unit of the free world and being very important part. And surely led by the United States of America, like the strongest power of the free world. And we're very thankful for all support we are receiving from the United States. This is vital for us. But we need more to finish this war as quickly as possible. So that's what I'm trying to lobby being here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Oleksiy. So you've been in Washington now for over a week, almost 10 days.
Yeah.
How are your meetings going? What's your sense of what you're hearing from U.S. politicians, members of administration, the community here in Washington? What are your impressions?
impressions are like good, but there are also concerns. So in general, I see that like mainstream is supporting Ukraine, and both on Republican side and Democratic side. So I see this bipartisan support also from administration, and that is very important. But there are, first of all, there are extremes in these both wings, far right and far left, and I see some problems with them. And like I had an honor to be invited to speak at ALEC. ALEC is American Legislators Exchange Council, which unites state legislators on the state level of Republican side in the whole country. And I spoke there, made a presentation on Ukraine that was very well received. But after we had a questions and answers session, and one state senator from Arizona asked me, but you are Nazis, you are killing Russian-speaking people. So, I mean, that we are, that is very important. That showed me that I was exactly at the right place, because I explained that I'm a Russian-speaking person myself. My first mother tongue is Russian. The only person who is killing Russian-speaking people is Putin. And Mariupol, which was 90% Russian-speaking, is destroyed to rubble, and so on, so on. But, and by the way, at the end, this state senator said, oh, maybe I don't know something. So that is the importance of communication. And but that is also the position which should be, we should work with. So first, my concern is about far right and far left people. We need to explain them that it is absolutely in their agenda to support Ukraine, both for far right and for far left. And we have a lot of arguments, like speaking about support and why it is important. Like United States invested 3% of its military budget to Ukrainian army, and with this we destroyed at least 50% of Russian military capacity. So United States are winning easily this war against Russia, not losing any soldier, and providing Ukraine with support, and really even not so huge financial support. Like, for example, Afghanistan and other were much more invested, uncomparable money, and almost without result. So that is one of the best investments of the United States to Ukrainian army. That is an argument I think important. Also, it is important, and I should remind that like Putin wants to disrupt the whole Europe. And for United States, even not speaking about moral part of things, but from practical point of view, for 48 from 50 states of the United States of America, Europe is the main trade partner and the main export market. So millions of jobs in the United States are dependent from the situation in Europe. And if Putin would not be stopped now, I mean, it's clear that it also will influence just immediately and directly millions of jobs here in the United States. Also, like being in the so respected law company like Shearman and Sterling, I should say that international law, either it will be restored by complete restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity, or we will just lost it, and we will have situation when the world is like wild jungles with the predators. They are hunting for peaceful nations without any rule of law, which will be like disastrous for the whole planet. So given these arguments, I see that people listen, and that's important. So that's first is like these far right, far left people. Second is what I'm concerned about is these limitations in weaponry supply to Ukraine. And these limitations are quite hard to explain, because we are provided with armored vehicles, but not tanks. We are provided with some drones, but not others, and not aircrafts. We are provided with HIMARSs, but only with the short-range missiles, not long-range missiles. We are provided with the Stingers and Hawks, but not with Patriots. With NASAMS, but not with Patriots. Why? I mean, it's some answers are that like long-range missiles to HIMARS will be escalatory, or like tanks will be escalatory. I mean, it's quite strange why 45 miles range is not escalatory and 80 miles range is escalatory.
Yeah, and how much more escalation?
Yeah, yes, you're right. The argument about escalation itself. Yeah, when we have the full-scale war in the middle of Europe with the missiles, with the fighters and everything. I'm just here, and my family, my wife and two of my kids are in Odessa now.
In Odessa.
Yeah, they in Odessa, and just these
Odessa was hit today.
today, exactly. That's what I woke up today with the call of my wife, that again, where the city is heated with a missile attack and complete blackout, no electricity,
And water supply
no
system.
water, no water.
Water supply system
So
destroyed
centralized
this morning.
water, it's not destroyed, but it is because of there is no electricity,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Exactly.
work. So no heating, just imagine like 1 million population city in the middle of Europe. And that's not the only one. Kiev is in more or less the same situation and other cities. So yeah, and this and with air defense, it's just coming, sorry to say this, but outside of even moral thing and understanding, can be air defense escalatory at all.
Yeah.
You cannot attack anything with Patriots. You just can protect your skies. That's all you can do. And I've heard two arguments why Ukraine is not provided by Patriots. First argument is that it is quite a difficult system to work on, so our crew will need quite some time to train. First of all, this argument is like by this, never ever we will receive it, if we will never start. But the second is on February 26th, I made a Zoom call with 54 American congressmen for the first time in my life, and I hope for the last.
2 days into the war.
Yeah, 2 days after the invasion started. I hope for the last time in my life, because like special circumstances.
Yeah.
And I was asked what we need. I gave information on the ground, but I reached our military and they said we need Patriot. One of things that we needed Patriots, and I was answered that by congressmen that they asked about this DOD. And DOD said that we will need like at least 3 months to train. And they said, you don't have these 3 months. And I met some of these congressmen last week.
Did you ask them?
Yes, they said, do you remember? They said like, yeah, I think like almost 10 months left. So we could have in summer already Patriots. By Patriots, we could protect our energy system. All these hell which is going on now and humanitarian catastrophe. And by the way, not only Ukraine is part of Moldova is also now without electricity. So it's even because of Russian strikes, because the systems is connected. So we could be not in this situation where we are, unfortunately, today. So I can't understand why we're not provided with Patriots. Nobody can explain me. And the second was argument that it is an expensive system. So also money, the thing and so on. But now we hear like Germany is saying to Poland that we want to give you Patriots to protect you. And Poland is saying that we want to give it to Ukraine. And nothing is happening. So it doesn't need any additional cent. There is a system already in Europe. And being in Ukraine, it will protect both Poland and Germany. Because from whom it protects Germany? From France? From Denmark? I mean, like it's clear. So that's why that is the second problem. And I feel that all these. So this is the problem. It should be fixed.
Yeah.
Because if we would receive tanks, fighters, drones, long-range missiles, we would finish this war in several months.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that will be finished. And that will be finished of this awful war from which suffers everybody. Markets are suffering, energy security is suffering, food security is suffering, prices, inflation, everything in one place. So we could fix the problem, but we need instruments.
And I would say that it's really this war highlights that really the system of international security that was established after the Second World War is not truly working.
Yeah, it's not, especially when aggressor is member of Security Council.
Security Council, permanent member.
Yeah, permanent security.
What this war is showing is that UN was supposed to prevent exactly what's happening, and it's not. NATO actually was designed as an organization for defense of its members, but to say that NATO can sit on sidelines and watch this war, watch genocide, watch the people destroy. Actually, initially Russians were saying, "Oh, we are targeting military installations." Now they are not even pretending.
Yeah.
Right? Now they are just hitting infrastructure, and they are happy, right? And their media is highlighting that, and they are celebrating that. Ukrainians are left without electricity, power, water, and everything else. So we need to revisit international security structures and systems so that it's actually working in a situation like Ukraine. The other thing is, you pointed to, this is, yes, the war started in Ukraine, but and it started actually back in 2014. This invasion started now. If we listen back to Putin's speech in Munich, it was 2007, I believe, right? Where he was talking about his vision. It was clear back then what his vision is. Ukraine is just the first step right now, right? And then there will be more and more. By the way, before Ukraine, he did Chechnya, completely destroying. And I know you've been meeting with people from Chechnya and supporting them.
And I was initiator of the bill to acknowledge Chechnya being occupied by Russia. And already we adopted it, and together with the recognition of genocide of Chechen people.
Yeah, exactly. So Ukraine is right now actually Ukraine is fighting the war for all of Europe because the next step, and Putin has said that, right? The Russians have said that they would want to go to Baltics. Actually, some of them said let's go all the way to La Manche, right? So there are speeches out there by Russian politicians and Russian media. So if we do not stop this war here, then what's going to be next? The other important point you made is just purely from humanitarian point of view. Can U.S., can Western Europe sit on sidelines and watch what's happening? Genocide, with clearly genocidal statements by Putin, by his entourage, by Russian politicians, by media, right? Where they just say that one Ukrainian nation should not exist. Does not exist. Ukraine cannot exist as a sovereign country. It's just outrageous what's going on. So nobody who wants to talk about democracy and talks about liberal values cannot sit on sidelines and watch what's happening. Kids are killed, civilians are killed. It's just atrocities that are committed by all military that in every occupied area. Can we talk maybe a little bit about, you mentioned...
May I add one thing? It's one more thing which I'm concerned about. It looks like some people in Washington and in general in the free world are afraid of Russian collapse, are afraid of Russian defeat.
Yeah.
I speak with on the level of think tanks, and I don't see even even discussion and debates on this. And I hear when I'm speaking with some of people here in Washington, they're telling, yeah, but we should do because they feel that it will be very dangerous about who will control nukes or what bloodshed may start and so on. And I agree that really it is a big issue and it can be a big problem, but we already have bloodshed. And we already have nukes blackmailing. So by trying to close the eyes and to be blind, we're not fixing the problem. So the only way is to start to be prepared to what will because I believe that we will finish with the Russian collapse. Because we saw it 100 years ago with Russian Empire, we saw it 30 years ago with Soviet Union. That is the next stage of this collapse of this empire, because the names are different, the empire is the same. And it will finish like this, and that will be a real challenge. But we should be prepared, and at least we could fix some problems during this. If not, there will be so. But I see that people are scared even to speak about it. They are scared, and that is the problem also. So you asked me what problems do I see, and that is the three main problems that I see here.
And I will add that I think, and the reason why it's so important that you're meeting with people here and explaining these things, because I'm afraid that here in the U.S. and in Europe, many people misunderstood what happened when Soviet Union was collapsing, right? They were concerned, by the way, at that time that Soviet Union will collapse, and so what's going to happen? By the way, the country that is democratic country out of the collapse of the Soviet Union is Ukraine, right? But I think people were concerned about the collapse of the Soviet Union at the time, and I think it's misunderstanding of what Russia actually is, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a colonial empire, and it existed pre-Soviet as colonial empire. It managed to exist as a colonial empire during Soviet times. Luckily, it actually collapsed so that at least some of the nations that were under Russian colonialism got independence, which Russia does not like. But there are many others within Russia that are currently colonized, people of different ethnic backgrounds, different religions. Russia does not want them to speak their languages. By the way, I think you may have posted it where among the mobilized, there was an order by the commander of one of the mobilized units to people of non-Russian ethnicities, don't speak your language. You have to speak Russian. Russian is the language that's spoken here. That's just a reflection of what's going on, right? To touch a little bit on international law, because I want to make sure that people in the business community fully understand it. What's happening is a clear violation of international law at many levels, right? You have the UN Charter that's clearly violated. Sovereign integrity of Ukraine was violated, and by the way, violated back in 2014, right? Continuing now with this invasion. So that's one level of violations of international law. But I also want to make sure that people understand that when Soviet Union was dissolved, by the way, it was in December of 1991, right? So we're coming on the anniversary of it. And the treaty was signed by Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine at the time, right? That treaty, it's international treaty. Again, we're talking about international law. It specifically said that Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine recognized each other's territorial integrity and that they respect the borders of each other, right? So that's 91. The other piece of international law that people should be aware of today actually is the anniversary of Budapest Memorandum, another international treaty, this time signed by Ukraine, Russia, United Kingdom, and United States. That treaty, international law, right? That treaty specifically stated that, and that treaty was entered into because Ukraine was giving up its nuclear weapons as a major gesture.
The only
country ever.
In the human history, the one time for history.
And so when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons, this Budapest Memorandum, an international treaty, was signed in 94, on December 5th. US, UK, and Russia guaranteed security of Ukraine. And the treaty specifically says, I'm quoting from memory, that all guarantors respect and will protect territorial integrity of Ukraine in its borders, which, by the way, includes Crimea, and it includes Donbass, all other occupied areas. Russia specifically agreed under international law by signing the treaty that it will respect and protect, guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity and its borders as they existed. By the way, to those in the US who question why we in the US support Ukraine, US is a guarantor under that treaty. So US also has international obligations under international law as a guarantor to protect Ukraine's sovereign integrity and territory. You mentioned a little bit, and I think for our audience, it would be interesting to hear this notion that Russian propaganda has been pushing for many years, and now during the war in particular, that Russian speakers are prosecuted in Ukraine, and that's the reason why Russia interfered. So let's talk a little bit about that so that people understand better. When I meet with my friends and colleagues, we talk about the differences between Russian and Ukrainian language, and that Ukraine is a multi-ethnic country, multi-ethnic nation where a lot of people speak Russian. So maybe a little bit about that. You are coming from multi-ethnic city where I think Russian actually was predominant language,
and still is.
Yeah, and still is, right?
And still is.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because I think there is a confusion about Russian-speaking population in Ukraine.
Absolutely. So I'm like a representative of this Russian-speaking population. I was born in Odessa. My mother tongue is, I consider my mother tongues both Ukrainian and Russian, but my first language on which my mother spoke with me is Russian. And like majority people in Odessa Yes, they speak Russian, and that's true. But I can tell you that, and what? So I mean, Putin is using this argument to say that we are the same nation, but it's not the fact. I mean, like, you cannot say that, I don't know, I also speak English, you speak English, some people in Africa speak English, in Asia, and we are all the same nation, or what? I mean, we know language is language, nation is nation, identity is identity, and these are different, absolutely different stories. I can tell you that not less than 50% of those who are now on the front line fighting against Russia are Russian speaking. I'm very often on the front line, and I can assure you that this is the fact, and everybody can see it. One more thing, which part of Ukraine suffered the most from this invasion? It's the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine. Mariupol, which was 90% Russian-speaking, destroyed. Kharkiv, a lot of suffering enormously, which is one of the biggest Russian-speaking cities in the world. And like Odessa, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and other cities. So Putin is just he doesn't care about Russian-speaking people. He's killing them. He's just using it as an excuse, as a pretext for invasion. If we agree with such rhetorics, so he can attack Miami. There are many Russian-speaking people here, or Brighton Beach. I don't know where, London, London Grad, how somebody called. Yeah, I mean, like, it's nonsense, complete nonsense. And Russian-speaking people hate Putin the most because, like. That is the situation. Also, it copies very much German, what Hitler did.
Yes.
He was saying that I will go wherever to protect Germans, wherever I want to, everywhere. Then he came, then he said, okay, maybe in Ukraine, not many Germans, but I want just this territory in Soviet Union. He entered. So that is not true. Ukraine is a democratic country with the rule of law. Nobody is hurt in Russian-speaking people. You can use Russian language wherever you want to in Ukraine, in private life, in business. And yeah, we have laws about Ukrainian language to support its development, and it's normal because for centuries it was suppressed by Russian Empire, and that is normal. That we're now trying to revive it and to give a new. But nobody ever in Ukraine forbid anybody to speak any language. It just never happened. It's just not true. So, but thank you for this question. I know that Russian propaganda is trying to use it.
And I'll add maybe a couple of things for our audience to understand. When Ukraine had a referendum on independence, this is also December 1991, more than 90% population of Donbas region voted for independence, right? And these are predominantly Russian speakers. The Russians was and is a language that's spoken widely, and there were never any prosecutions. So this is a made up pretense to come to Donbas and to Crimea, actually first Crimea, then Donbas in 2014. And actually, if we were to look at what really was happening is Putin was not happy that Yanukovych did not win in 2004. Then he was not happy with Maidan in 2014 because Yanukovych was trying to bring Ukraine into Russia's fold. And so he really wanted to have his own person, his own stooge in Ukraine. And so it was a punishment, quote unquote, to Ukraine for Maidan and for pushing Yanukovych out, right?
You're right, but I think it was even more. Putin still, he wants to reconquer the full empire till Berlin. I just want to remind you that 30 years ago, Berlin was divided. We're not speaking about Berlin was divided. So, and he wants to reconquer everything, and he wants to compete with the United States. But he understands clearly that without Ukraine, without Ukrainian resources, without Ukrainian people, he can't do this. That's why for him, Ukraine is so vital. That's why he's so desperate to take Ukraine. And he will not stop. If by any chance we will not now finish the war with a decisive victory, with the complete restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity, if Ukraine will not receive a real guarantees of our security, Putin will come back in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years. It doesn't matter. he will come back because he is still desperate and desperately wanting Ukraine. So we should understand it.
And that's a very important point, particularly when people are asking, and there are a number of politicians who are asking that, and some other people innocently ask, why don't we have negotiations now and just settle, right? There is no way to settle with Russia in the current state.
Absolutely.
Right?
We are ready for negotiations about how Russia is retreating from Ukraine.
Once Russia leaves Ukraine, pays reparations, and actually gives Ukraine the ability to live, right? But people misunderstand it, and so they misunderstand that negotiations in a format that Putin calls negotiations, all it means is just Ukraine capitulating, right? Yeah. And then Russia reposition itself. Russia, gets its strength back so that it can attack more next time, probably even in a worse way, and not only Ukraine but the rest of Europe. A couple of other, probably points on the Russian-Ukrainian language and culture. This is not the first time when the Russian colonial empire, tried to directly prosecute Ukrainians for being Ukrainians, Ukrainian culture, suppressing Ukrainian languages. Just for our audience, a couple of pieces of history. Ukraine signed a military treaty in 1654 with Russia, right? And it was really to defend against common threats, and that was Treaty of Cooperation. That became, unfortunately, the beginning of a gradual colonization of Ukraine, right? And that colonization became particularly prominent under Peter I, the so-called Great, as Russians call him. And that colonization had interesting, that history of colonization had a few interesting moments. One is Ukraine was actually democratic at the time, which most people do not realize, that Ukrainians were electing their leader, hetman, all the way from 1654 when they signed the treaty, actually predating that, right? But until 1722, when Peter the First, the so-called Great, ultimately decided to ban the elections and install, instead of hetman, the Malorosійська Collegia, right? Which by the way, again, for our audience to realize what it means. Malorosійська means Little Russian agency, right, to control Ukraine instead of the elected hetman, elected leader. Malorosійська, by the way, also stands for Ukrainians were referred to as Malorossi, which is Little Russians, as compared to Velikorossi, Great Russians, referring to Russians themselves, right? Very kind of curious thing. But that time period during Peter I was also very bloody for Ukraine. So the city of Baturin, which was the seat of hetman, in 1709 was destroyed. 14,000 Ukrainian civilians, women, children were killed. That was Peter's response to Ukraine at the time, asserting its independence. Peter was also the one who suppressed the Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture. I believe it was 1709 as well, after Baturin, that Peter ordered to have Ukrainian scientists from Ukrainian university to be moved to Moscow, and reduced the number of students at the Kiev University at the time from 2,000 students to 160 students. So that was a direct move to suppress the culture, suppress the language. Identity. The language was banned, actually, right, as the language in Ukraine. And so, by the way, the other point you made, that many people speak Russian. First of all, there are many ethnically Russian Ukrainians. But the second, before Ukraine became independent in 91, for our audience to realize that Ukrainian language schools were in absolute minority in Ukraine. In Kiev, there were just a handful of schools that were actually teaching in Ukrainian. All other schools were Russian schools, and so
in Odessa, I think it was like 1-2 schools from hundreds.
Right? So from that point of view, if you look at what actually that leads to, so people come out of these schools, they spoke Russian throughout their 10, 11 years of
Russified,
school.
yeah.
Of course they're Russified. Of course they speak Russian because it's a convenient language. But by the way, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with people speaking Russian language. It's just that the Ukrainian language was suppressed.
Yeah.
And so that's where when people say that, well, there are so many people speaking Russian in Ukraine, of course, because, the entire system was working towards developing Russian and suppressing Ukrainian. And so Ukraine made a tremendous job in bringing back Ukrainian language, reviving it, which, by the way, a huge kudos to Ukraine as a nation to preserving the language and culture over all these centuries of suppression.
Absolutely.
Maybe a couple words also just for our audience to understand the situation with Crimea, 2014, what happened with Crimea, a little bit of, history, because I think sometimes you can hear innocent questions, actually, right? Well, is Crimea different than Donbass, for example, right? So if you can talk a little bit about that.
First of all, from the point of international law, Crimea is not different to any other part of Ukraine. It is a part of Ukraine which is accepted and acknowledged and confirmed by all nations, members of the United Nations, by Russia itself, with many treaties that you mentioned, that Crimea is Ukraine. History of Crimea, if to start to speak, who is this Crimea? They like to say, Crimea was given to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1950s. That's true. That was a decision. But by this to say, 100 years more into the history, it was like Crimean Tatars state, Krymske Khanstvo, Crimean Tatar state, and Russians came there. And before there, who was it was part of Ottoman Empire. It was other, so there were Italian colonies, Genoa colonies, and so on. So if to go to the history and ancient Greece, so we can find everything. That's why I think the world lives by international law, because you can go and you will start who are. There are things which are settled, and when you start to do this, especially for Russia, it should be dangerous. Being completely combined from territories of other nations, from Königsberg to Far East. It's them should be the most interested nation in international law than Russia, the biggest country in the world. But they are not, and they try to argue that Crimea is something special. One more thing, that Russia is really committing genocide in Ukraine now, and unfortunately all 5 criteria are met, like you said. Public these statements that Ukrainians do not exist, and the language and identity does not exist. This is the clear criteria, number 1. Also, forceful deportation of people, including children, to change their identity. Well, that's unfortunately the case. Sexual violence in order to make Ukrainian women or not to be able to born again, or to try to change identity by these things. And unfortunately, we have this mass murders. So we have everything, and destroyment of our cultural heritage. First thing they're doing, they're burning the books, they're destroying the monuments. That is cultural identity. So they are clearly making genocide, but also they're making a genocide of Crimean Tatars in Crimea, indigenous people who live there.
And you've met with many.
And a lot of them are my friends, and the leader of Crimean Tatar people, Mustafa Jamilov, is I can call him my teacher and a very respected person in Ukraine, and he's member of Ukrainian parliament, and he's deprived from the right to come to Crimea. So he can't go to his, and that is not the first time Russia is doing it. They made a forceful deportation of Crimean Tatars in 1944 from Crimea. And by this, Crimea was changed ethnically. And only in the end of Soviet Union, they succeeded to come back. And now again, Russia is doing everything to push them out from Crimea. So that's why, speaking about Crimea, it's a place where Russia is committing multiple crimes. Crime of genocide against Crimean Tatars, crime of genocide against Ukrainians, after Russia occupied Crimea, they closed all Ukrainian schools and everything. Crime of violation of international law by taking that part. And those who are saying, "Oh, let us treat Crimea differently," it means they're saying, "Oh, let us not respect international law."
Yeah.
So that's why for us we see definitely full restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity, including Crimea.
Including Crimea. That's where it's so important. And as you said, this is guaranteed by international treaties, including the 91 and 94 that we just discussed. That includes Russia, UN Charter, and so on and so forth. A couple of words to add to the history of Crimea. So Crimea was colonized by Russia starting in 1783. So Ukraine colonization started 1654. Crimea 1783, and to your point, when Russia started colonizing it, right? At that time, even Russia deported a lot of Crimean Tatars. Back even in 1700s.
So, like in the end of the 18th century, there were no Russians in Crimea.
Yeah.
And at the end of no Russians in Crimea, and all many nations, some Greeks, Italians, Ukrainians, so on. But the majority were Crimean Tatars. At the middle of 20th century, there were no Crimean Tatars there at all. It could happen, like the whole nation disappeared, and the majority became Russians.
Well, because what Stalin did in 1944, right, 400,000 Crimeans, against for our audience to understand, 400,000 Crimean Tatars were deported. By the way, it's a statistic that not a lot of people know. I believe 46% of those deported died within a couple of years after deportation, right? So it was a genocide of the old colonial empire with respect to Crimea as well. And then maybe a couple words. I watched very interesting interviews with Kravchuk, the first president of Ukraine, and he studied Communist Party archives. And what he came across and described in these interviews, so I'm describing what he said, was in 1954, when this decision about quote unquote transfer of Crimea from Russian Federation within the Soviet Union to Ukrainian SSR within the Soviet Union, how that happened was that after Stalin deported Crimean Tatars, he moved Russian settlers into Crimea, but those settlers did not know what to do because it was very different agricultural type of environment, and so they were really struggling. And so by 1954, when Stalin died, Khrushchev came to power. There was a lot of pressure on Khrushchev somehow to deal with this issue because he was getting complaints. Again, this is Kravchuk describing, right? He was getting complaints about Russian settlers wanting to go back. He went to visit Crimea, and he was facing all these complaints. And so he went straight from Kiev, according to Kravchuk, and met with the head of Communist Party of Ukraine, Kirichenko at the time, and told him, take Crimea and take care of Crimea. Kirichenko said, no, I'm not going to do it. Again, this is Kravchuk studying the archives. I'm not going to do it because it will require enormous investment, and Ukraine has plenty of problems without Crimea, so I'm not going to do it. So he then dragged Kirichenko into Moscow to Politburo meeting, and Politburo told Kirichenko, you have to take Crimea. And after that, there were, the things were done this way in Soviet Union, but then there were actual legislative decisions, and by Russian Federation legislative body, by a Soviet legislative body in April of 1954, right? And the main stated reason for that was that its closeness of economic ties, ethnic ties, and so on and so forth. And so it was actually properly legally done, politically within the Soviet system, it was done that way, and Ukraine did not want it. And then, according to Kravchuk, he said that between 1954, when Crimea was transferred to Ukraine, and independence in 91, Ukraine invested $100 billion, he said, into Crimea, building infrastructure, bringing electricity, water canals, pretty much everything. And that was not additional money coming out of the Soviet budget. That was money that was reallocated from Ukraine's budget that could have gone to developing other areas in Ukraine. So this whole notion that it was a gift to Ukraine is nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But most importantly, as you said, nobody can say that, okay, we're going to go and revisit the international borders just because they want so, right? There are a lot of international borders that have been established over centuries that, some other country existed there before, right? So it's very, very important that Ukraine gets its territorial integrity back, and Crimea is a big part of it. Anything else you'd like to tell the audience, the international U.S. business community? Particularly would be interesting, what you think Ukraine needs the most. People are helping, people are trying to do a lot of things everywhere. What do you think, the business community should focus on, and, where the help is most needed? Obviously, military help is needed, but, anything you want to the audience?
Thank you. I think what needed from the business is, first of all, business can lobby the support of Ukraine. And I would like to ask all those who are listening to us to speak with politicians, with officials, and to encourage them that there is support, because the United States is a democratic country. In democratic country, it is the public who decides, and politicians are following it. And the business community is a very important part of public. So they appeal that international law should be restored, that it should be a victory of Ukraine. That is important. Secondly, again, as I said, business community understands that millions of jobs in the United States are dependent from stable and developing Europe, and not like disrupted like Putin wants to do this. Thirdly, that Ukraine can be enormous, important market and partner for the United States. Already today, we have the strongest army on the continent. Really, it's the strongest army. So having such strong army, isn't it a smart idea to keep this country as close as possible? Because who knows what will be tomorrow and how the world will move. So our country is important. Thirdly, our resources. Like if you, for example, agriculture, now the whole world sees what does it mean just to close Black Sea. Even having the possibility to export our production through the western border to Poland, to Romania. But without Black Sea, the whole world suffers. The prices are peaking. There is people are starving in Africa. Inflation here. Inflation causes political troubles. And all of this is definitely not in the interest of any normal people and business and anything. So Ukraine is vital for food security of the world, and the Black Sea in general, by the way, like it was for centuries and even thousands of years, starting from ancient Greece.
Yep.
So we shouldn't forget that Black Sea is so vital. And also it opens enormous possibilities. For example, agriculture. Together, Ukraine and US are making in some products near half of the world export. Half of the world export.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wheat, it's corn, it's barley, and sunflower oil. We're number one in the world, just us, just without anybody else. I mean, that is so. We are so important part, and together with the United States, we can develop these possibilities: natural resources, energy. Again, Ukraine is vital in all of this. So, taking everything together, we understand that sovereign, free, democratic Ukraine can be in great benefit for American business. American business can come, invest, use these possibilities, and have a lot of response. By the way, unfortunately, the country is devastated, so it will be rebuilt, and that will be the biggest reconstruction project maybe in the 21st century, but maybe in the world history, because I mean, even Germany, it was a great project, but it was like many years ago. And now, like big country in the middle of Europe, who will do it? I think American companies should take a great part in this, and also will benefit from this. They will create jobs, this will create a lot of possibilities. IT sector, Ukrainian IT, one of the best in the world, and I am sorry to say this, but here in the United States, I feel myself that I'm more digitalized than United States. I have like my electronic ID. I go DIA and many other things. It's not only, I mean, like in many things, I feel that and we can be also one of leaders here, space industry. So I mean, it can be, like we will speak without finish. But all of these are making a lot of possibilities for American business community. So pushing the political agenda of support Ukraine, that's the first thing. Second thing, certainly help to those who need this help.
Yeah.
I am not saying that we are speaking about volunteering, about charities. It's a lot of American business helps, and we are very thankful for this. But also, I just want to encourage those who are listening to us to continue to do this. That is so important. And if you will need any partners in Ukraine for this, we are ready to help you, to connect you. Also, I organized in Ukraine the biggest network of educational, cultural, non-governmental network of educational cultural centers, which are called Goncharenko centers. And we work, and by the way,
amazing work.
Thank you. Yeah.
Following what you've been doing.
Yeah, and there is a free of charge English language for adults and children. And so we are doing a lot of this. But after February 24, we are also very much inside volunteering, humanitarian support, and up to military support. So those who are interested, so we are just our network, more than 50 vehicles, dozens of drones, 11 anti-drone rifles. We even bought self-propelled howitzer. It's 122 millimeters, like just with people.
And it was
crowdfunding, right? So we will be happy, and also like it can be done. We have centers in different cities, so it can be done on the level of like one company to, for example, Mykolaiv or for Kherson or for Chernigov. Maybe because there is some connection of people there, or maybe they just want to help this city, and we are ready to do this together. It can be some scholarship programs that our network we can help to choose some people, some young talented people from Ukraine to come and to study here and to have an experience and so on. So the enormous possibilities of communication and cooperation here. So I encourage to do this. Also on the level of we have all respect to, and we believe in federalism, that is United States of America. That's why I was so privileged to speak to ALEC conference, and already I have some invitations, preliminary invitations to address to like state senates and Congress to come to Tennessee, to Minnesota, I don't know, Kansas, Arizona, and so on, and to speak to them. And we are ready to do this. And again, if you know local politicians and also to speak with local business to explain what's going on, and that is very important for us. That is part of our job. So and certainly it is about I am here in a law company, one of the most respectable companies in the world, and I want to say thank you for all pro bono work that you are doing for Ukraine, and we will, and that is a huge space to continue to do the work, because really that is a new challenges for the world. How to freeze and seize Russian assets. And for reparations, because it should be not. First of all, it should be not American taxpayers to pay for what Russia did, but Russia for what they did, and that is clear. A huge amount of work in protecting our children and to fight to take them back, because thousands of them are deported to Russia, and Russia is now they are giving them to new families, and they're changing their surnames, names. It will be a very big work to find these children, to take them back, because this is Ukrainian children.
And they were separated from their parents.
They were separated from their parents or relatives, orphans too, but also from their relatives. So this is a big work. International Tribunal, how it will work. There are different views on it, and it should be separate, or it should be on the existing bodies. But the problem is that Russia is a member of Security Council. Next question is international security. What is Russia doing as a permanent member? Why Russia is permanent member of Security Council? Any lawyer in the world could open the Charter of United Nations and to know that Russia never was permanent member of Security Council. Even more, Russia never joined United Nations. So what they're doing in Security Council? How it happened? Well, according to what?
But by the way, let's pause on this one just to make sure that people understand the history there.
Yeah.
So when UN was created, right, in 1945, the members of UN, the Soviet Union became the member. Ukraine, as part of the Soviet Union,
Ukraine, Soviet Socialistic Republic,
in
right?
1945. Russia did not become a member of United Nations in 1945, as Ukraine did, notwithstanding that Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union at the time. Russia took upon itself that somehow it's a successor to the Soviet Union as a permanent member of the Security Council. But actually, there was no treaty, there was no agreement, there was no legal body that actually said that, yes, Russia is succeeding into the seat of the Soviet Union.
Never General Assembly voted for this, nothing.
Yeah, nothing. So it's very important for all of our friends to understand that it's not a given that Russia has actually the right to have the seat of the Security Council. Soviet Union did. Yeah, but not Russian Federation.
Absolutely, that is the truth, and also that is a question of international law. So also, how many will be suits? I mean, positive lawsuits. Lawsuits from American citizens who lost their property in the Ukraine, from Ukrainians against what had happened. So all this, the huge work for international for law companies, and it's also the big part and important part of the job which should be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Oleksiy.